Welcome to the Blitz Take episode number 4 with Bills writer Ryan Talbot. And thank you so much for coming on to talk about how Bills training camp is going and what to expect in the upcoming season.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So my first question is, what were your thoughts on the draft this year?
Yeah, I like what the Bills did. Listen, when you're one of the better teams in the league and you're picking late in each round, you don't know what kind of talent's going to be there for you. And going into the draft, I think everyone had a pretty good idea that they wanted a cornerback. And lo and behold, Kaiir Elam falls into their lap late in round 1. Elam's been having a pretty good camp. He and Stephon Diggs have had some battles already. You have James Cook in round 2. Cook's been explosive thus far. Obviously, you want to see what he can do once the pads come on, but I think there's a lot of reason for optimism with James Cook. You have Devin Singletary, who strong end of the season last year. Zach Moss, who ideally would be that between the tackle, hard yard back, but you don't have someone that's a natural pass catcher and that has the extra gear that Cook has. So I think there's a lot of reasons to be excited about Cook. Terrell Bernard has made some plays early on at camp. There's a clear path for him to be that number 3 linebacker. They do play a lot of 2 linebacker sets, but when they go more traditional 4-3 looks, he could be on the field. Has a lot of athleticism, a very similar build to Matt Milano in terms of size, speed, and attributes. Skipping through a few other picks. Khalil Shakir, really good wide receiver out of Boise State. He's had a nice camp thus far, showing good hands, showing, Josh Allen's already showing some trust in him. And then you have Matt Araiza competing for the punter job. Big leg. He has to work a little bit on the hang time, but I do like his odds of winning that job as well.
What were your thoughts on day 1 of training camp?
Yeah, it's always wait and see this time of year because of the lack of the pads. So just like any other early training camp practices, the defense was ahead of the offense on those early days. However, I will say the last training camp practice before today's day off, the offense won the day. Josh Allen and company were pretty explosive in the red zone. They were scoring a lot of touchdown passes. And listen, Allen has quite the arsenal to choose from. Obviously, Stephon Diggs is his number 1. Gabriel Davis is in line for a big year this year as his number 2. Isaiah McKenzie right now, I would say, is the favorite to be the slot receiver. Jamison Crowder's dealing with a little bit of lower body tightness, so he's been on a bike for a few days now. Hasn't been out there practicing. Khalil Shakir could move up the depth chart quickly, but I think Isaiah McKenzie will be the starting slot receiver. And then you have some other younger guys trying to make some noise. I already mentioned Shakir. They have a draft pick from last year, Marquez Stevenson, who had a pretty good day yesterday, but he has to work on his drops and his consistency. Isaiah Hodgins was a draft pick a few years back. He hasn't really been very consistent, but those guys are still in play. And then you have some older veterans in the mix for a job as well, like Tavon Austin. Then you have Jake Kumaro, who's been here for a few seasons on and off. He's moved around the league a little bit, but it's a pretty talented wide receiver room. I already mentioned some of the backs. Then you have Dawson Knox, OJ Howard and company at tight end too. So Josh Allen has a lot of places to throw the ball.
What were your thoughts on the addition of Von Miller?
Yeah, that's kind of just the missing piece, so to speak. Last year, you look at this team, and I know they finished number 1 in terms of a lot of defensive categories, but a lot of that had to do with the schedule, the quarterbacks they played. I'm not trying to take anything away from this unit, but at the same time, it wasn't what it seemed because up front, the pass rush wasn't very good. Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison, they were fine, but they weren't difference makers. You had a lot of young guys in Greg Rousseau, Boogie Basham, AJ Epinesa. And then on the inside, you had Ed Oliver, who took on a lot of double teams, but still had a really good year. With Von Miller now in the mix, that changes the outlook of that defensive line. He's going to be dependent on to make those big plays that the Bills were missing up front last year. He's going to hopefully help some of these younger players, the Rousseaus, the Bashams, and the Epinesas of the world. They brought back Shaq Lawson. And then even the defensive tackle spot, is bolstered now as well with Tim Settle and Daquan Jones. So, obviously led by Von Miller, I think this unit's going to be significantly better, but the unit as a whole, kudos to Brandon Beam for the way he went out and he added some really talented pieces to this team in free agency.
What are your thoughts on Tavon Austin?
Tavon Austin's interesting. He had a few good years early on in his career with the Rams. Never really lived up to the draft stock, though, in terms of where they drafted him. He was a high first-round pick, and he was used as like a gadget player and things like that. In the last few years, he's bounced around a little bit. He was with Dallas for a while. He's been a little bit around the league, almost, I don't want to say a journeyman, because when you're a first-round pick like that, you're never truly a journeyman, but right now in Buffalo, there's an opportunity for him at least to make this roster because they're looking for returners. Last year it was Isaiah McKenzie, and at one point in the year, Sean McDermott came out and said he didn't have confidence in McKenzie as a returner. It was Marquez Stevenson for a little bit. He had some issues handling the ball and fumbling it. So who's he going to trust in that role? You don't always want to bring back Micah Hyde when things are going poorly in terms of punt returns, which is what they've done in the past. As good as Micah Hyde is at fielding the ball, all it takes is one muff for him to take a shot that you don't want one of your premier safeties to be taking. So you want someone back there you can trust. And I think that's what Tavon Austin can do to really get himself onto this roster. And if he makes this roster, you can bring him in on offense, and he can be that guy that can get behind defenses because so much attention is going to be paid to Diggs and Davis and Knox that you're going to get some favorable matchups for Tavon Austin, and the speed is still there. So is he going to be a significant difference maker? No, not to the level of superstar players that the Bills have, obviously, but I think there is an opportunity for him to carve out a role here in Buffalo.
What is your perspective on how Josh Allen will perform with their new acquisitions and their new draft prospects?
Yeah, you would like to think that he's going to get on the same page with them by week one, but it's more complicated than that because he lost Brian Daboll as well in the offseason. His longtime offensive coordinator becomes head coach of the New York Giants. So now he has Ken Dorsey as the offensive coordinator. The good news for Allen, of course, is that Dorsey's been here for a few years as his quarterback's coach. He knows a lot of what worked well under Brian Daboll, and I'm sure they're going to keep most of that in there. But now you're also going to see, what does Ken Dorsey want to do? Does he want to get the running backs more involved in the passing game? Does he want to run more 2 tight end sets? And that's going to have a role going with your question in terms of all these new players for him to target, whether it's James Cook out of the backfield, Khalil Shakir, who ideally I think is best fit in the slot, but I think he has the talent to play on the outside as well. OJ Howard. That list goes on and on. I think as the season progresses, you'll see them start to gel more and more. But obviously, once he gets on the same page as a player, you see the way it's paid off. Obviously, with Diggs and Davis here now, you can go back to how Cole Beasley performed in Buffalo before he left, before he was cut this past year. John Brown had a career year in Buffalo. You can even go back even further than that to a guy like Robert Foster, who was here for one of Allen's first years and was really making plays down the field for the team. And you haven't heard much of him since around the league since that point. So Allen does get the best out of his talent, his playmakers, regardless of where they are in terms of talent level. But with all this talent that they have, I would like to think that this offense could be even scarier in 2022.
So what are your initial thoughts on how the schedule is like?
It's a tough start to the year for Buffalo. Obviously you go on the road and you take on the Super Bowl champs. That was a game that a lot of Bills fans were clamoring for. They were hoping that would be the game. And I don't want to say be careful what you wish for, because you have to play these teams no matter what. And I guess maybe week one would be best because you're going to be kicking off some rust and you might not be as sharp as you would be mid-season. But that's a real tough week one game. Week two, you come home and you host the Titans in prime time. The Titans, to their credit, have been a thorn in the side of the Bills the past few years. Last year's game went down to the wire, a failed QB sneak to keep their drive alive. at the very end, stop the Bills there. But those are always pretty much dog fights. You have Miami in week 3. NFL loves to schedule Buffalo and Miami early in the year, and then Miami and Buffalo late in the year. It feels like Miami, they're much improved on paper. You bring in a Tyreek Hill, you have year 2 of Jalen Waddle. Mike Gesicki is really good at tight end. They added a lot of running backs, a new head coach. So I don't think they're going to be a pushover by any stretch of the imagination. And then you go to you look even further down, you have the Ravens, then eventually you have the Packers, the Chiefs, all in the first half of the season. One game before the bye, one game before the bye, I believe, is Kansas City, and then post bye, it's the Packers. So, I mean, it's a very tough slate to start the year. It softens up at the end of the year. I think as long as the Bills are hovering at 500 or over 500 after those tough games, they're going to be just fine, though, in terms of the AFC East and then playing their best football going into the playoffs.
What stood out to you during day 1 of training camp media coverage?
You still had a lot of the questions that were lingering from last off season. I do like the fact and respect the fact that they're ready to turn the page. The way last year ended wasn't how any of them envisioned it. To that playoff game, having the lead so late in it, and then kind of blowing that, not getting a chance at the football. I just think that this team is ready for a fresh start. They're ready to put that in the past and kind of hit the ground running. So I like the leadership on this team. I can appreciate the fact that everyone showed up and participated. There were some questions about Jordan Poyer and whether or not he would actually practice, as he's kind of looking to get a new contract, change the agents to Drew Rosenhaus. But he came, he wanted to be on that practice field. It was important to him. So, nothing but encouraging signs thus far.
What was the typical schedule like for you for day 1 of training camp?
Well, the schedule's the same for a lot, all the media members. You cover the practice. Usually before the practice, there's a little bit of availability from some coaches or players. Post practice, you're talking to players after practice. You're going to some media sessions. Sometimes it's radio spots. You're writing things. You're podcasting. So all in all, Alex, it's a pretty hectic day every day you're out there doing that. Matt Perino, who I work with, is living the dorm life when he's there. He's there every single day. I'm coming out a few days here and there. So it's definitely different for me than it is for him. But, the beat reporters put in a lot of work this time of year as well.
Are you going to travel to Indianapolis for the first preseason game?
I will not be. I'm going to be out of town. I'm going to be on a vacation there right as the regular season starting up. So I will not be there. Matt will be there covering that and all the preseason games. But looking forward to eventually crossing that one off my bucket list, getting to that stadium. Looking forward to covering some games at home and on the road this year. Second year in a row having a Thanksgiving game to cover. So this year it's in Detroit. Last year was a lot of fun in New Orleans. I'm sure we'll all have a good time in Detroit as
well. So I have one more question for you. What any time frame of Jamison Crowder and Kumar returning?
Yeah, no, nothing just yet. All we kind of hear is they're dealing with soreness. So realistically, maybe tomorrow or Saturday. Saturday is when the pads come on for the first time. Maybe they're both out there and they get eased back in. Kumaro was a newer addition to that. Crowder's been there for a few days. So it's kind of wait and see mode, but excited to see them both out there soon, hopefully, trying to earn their reps and earn their spot on this depth chart.
I'm definitely excited to see your work with the Buffalo Bills this upcoming season, and interested to see how the Bills do once the regular season gets underway. And thank you so much again for coming on, and hope to have you back on soon.
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.